Psychic was once a godlike type in competitive Pokemon. In the Generation 1 games, there is no downside to being a Psychic type. The only type Psychic is weak to in Gen 1 is Bug, and Bug type attacks pretty much don't even exist. Bug types themselves are terrible, and the only Bug type attack you might see is Pin Missile on Jolteon, which is hardly a threat. Psychic types have access to the creatively named attack Psychic, which has a power of 90 and a 33% chance to lower the target's special stat by 1. This is an incredible secondary effect that can allow you to break through even the sturdiest of walls. Reducing a Pokemon's special stat means they deal less damage and take more damage. Unfortunately, their time in the spotlight would not last forever, though. The Psychic type may just have had the most catastrophic drop-off of any Pokemon type in the series. From Gen 1 to 2, Psychic types went from godlike to average very quickly. Dark and Steel type were both introduced in Generation 2. Dark is immune to Psychic and super effective against it, and Steel resists Psychic. That secondary effect on the move Psychic was also nerfed to only be a 10% drop chance on special defense. This once spammable offensive type with no real downside to it was now actually balanced, much to the dismay of Alakazam Nation. The years would not be kind to Psychic types either. At least in the early generations, they didn't have to worry too much about Ghost type attacks, but once the physical special split was put into place, Psychic typing started to become more of a detriment. Psychic types are vulnerable to Pursuit, a Dark type trapping move, and vulnerable to U-Turn, a Bug type pivoting move introduced in Gen 4, and one of the most common attacks in the game. The buffing of Knockoff in Gen 6 certainly didn't help. This quickly became the new most popular attack in the game, and it was a Dark type attack. So attempting to exist as a Psychic type just got even harder. The once great Steel-Psychic type combination also suffered from the nerf to Steel in Gen 6. Steel no longer resisted Dark and Ghost, leaving that Psychic typing wide open for Dark and Ghost type attacks to punish. Psychic typing almost feels like an active disadvantage in the modern games, with way more cons than pros. Dark and Ghost types are more common than ever, and being a Psychic type in this economy is tough. But some do still rise to the top of competitive, in spite of their exploitable typing. And in some generations of OU, Psychic typing does still feel very strong, for interesting reasons. Let's explore Psychic types throughout the years in competitive Pokemon. A type once on top of the world, and now struggling to survive. Another point to understand about Psychic type Pokemon, such as Alakazam, is that they are big fans of high fashion. Slowbro was sighted recently wearing a gaming koala vintage cap that he got from JimothyCool.com. Take a look for yourself, folks. These wonderful clothing items have some serious upside associated with them. Thank you. Mewtwo is the Psychic type, the icon. In Gen 1, this Pokemon was designed to be as overpowered as possible. And Gen 1 Ubers pretty much exists to contain Mewtwo within it. Mewtwo's stats are absurd: 154 special, incredible bulk, incredible speed, incredible everything. Even the attack is really great. And Mewtwo also has an incredibly vast set of tools. Amnesia is a common option, raising your special stat by 2, one of the strongest boosts in Pokemon history, because the special stat is of course special attack and defense combined into 1. So it's basically times 2 special attack and special defense, making you unkillable and also unswitch-inable. You are going to KO everything instantly. And you have whatever coverage move your heart desires. Psychic is usually the way to go, just hit him with the big move, but Thunderbolt is great coverage for Cloyster, Starmie, etc. Flying types. Recover to heal yourself, because of course you have Recover as well. Mewtwo can also do Self-Destruct to explode. I believe some can run Submission as fighting coverage to hit Chansey, Snorlax, who are obviously central Pokemon in their own right. Tauros as well, off the back of an impressive physical attack stat. You get Hyper Beam, maybe that comes in handy. Probably not. You'd rather just jam Psychic, I would assume. Apparently you can also run Flash just as a stall strategy to sit there and lower their accuracy, which is very fun, isn't it? And Gen 1 Ubers is an interesting metagame because it's just 2 Pokemon in Ubers and they are just auto-includes on every team. But the set you choose to run on Mewtwo can vary greatly, whether you go Amnesia Sweeper or Self-Destruct to trade and just apply more short-term pressure. Mew also exists, a more honest and altruistic Pokemon. I've always been a fan of Mew. I like how versatile it is. With 100 base stats across the board, you can go whatever direction you want. Defensive, offensive, attack, special attack. It's got it all. Mew is also famous for being able to learn any TM in the game, giving it one of the most varied move pools in all of Pokemon. And you know me, folks, I love options. I love variety. Mew's best set in Gen 1 is just a Swords Dance set, because Swords Dance is actually pretty powerful by Gen 1 standards, and not many Pokemon get it. Like Venusaur gets it, Victory Bell, the occasional Pinsir. Most Pokemon in OU that get Swords Dance are weaker. I don't even think anything OU ranked besides Victory Bell can learn it. But Mew is a great Pokemon with Swords Dance, with really impressive attack, so with healing and great physical attacking options as well, this is a great physical sweeper. And Mew gets some other interesting options like Transform. Maybe you can copy some Amnesia Mewtwo's, turn into a Mewtwo with a bunch of Amnesia boosts and 1v1 them like that, matching their power. Mew also gets the Swords Dance and Explosion combo, which would age quite well moving forward. This is a great combo. A Thunder Wave for utility, a fantastic status ailment. Mew not as ridiculous as Mewtwo stats-wise, but its versatility is its real strength. And of course in OU we have multiple relevant Psychic types in the Gen 1 metagame, a fantastic type to have back then with no downside. It makes sense that so many Psychic types would rise to the top. I think the most iconic Psychic type behind Mewtwo and Mew has got to be Alakazam, one of the kings of Generation 1. It's like Mewtwo Mini. It's got impressive special stat. Luckily, Alakazam does not learn Amnesia. If it did, we would all be in for it, wouldn't we? That would be extremely powerful. But it does get Psychic, which you need. Seismic Toss it uses, just for miscellaneous damage, dealing 100 to anything equal to your own level. Alakazam famously a really fast Thunder Wave user. Great lead for this reason. You outrun most other leads in the game like Gengar, Jinx, Starmie, and you can get an immediate Thunder Wave off on them, which starts the game off with a little bit of an early advantage. Assuming you Thunder Wave the desirable target. Sometimes a Chansey comes in and actually wants to be Thunder Waved, so it can't be frozen later. There's a whole Thunder Wave paralysis metagame going on in Gen 1 that's quite complicated. But apart from this, Alakazam also has Reflect. This can help Alakazam significantly on the physical defense side, where it is lacking. Reflect will double your physical defense until you switch out. And Alakazam really shows just how powerful the Psychic type was in Gen 1. You just need Psychic Stab to pose a significant threat. You outrun a lot of stuff. Because you have such high speed, you tend to crit things a lot. Get them with this special drop chance. You can even break through Chansey, who is infamous for being a indestructible wall. But with enough Psychic drops, you're eventually going to get there, especially if they're paralyzed and they get disrupted by that, denying them a crucial heal. And Alakazam can just break through with the brute force of Psychic Stab and that enormous special stat. Exeggutor, another top tier Psychic type in Gen 1. This is the peak of Exeggutor's career. It is a earth-shattering force in Gen 1, with access to everything that you want in the world. Sleep Powder is excellent. Utility, directly denying an enemy from moving and doing anything useful. Psychic Stab goes crazy, as we have established, off the back of an impressive 125 special. And you can explode. And you have myriad options for the 4th move slot. Stun Spore is a good one. For paralysis, another useful status ailment to apply. Mega Drain is not the best, only 40 power, but it hits Rhydon specifically for good damage, who is ×4 weak. Hyper Beam, a classic attack in Gen 1 that can finish off low health enemies, not having to charge if you KO them successfully. And it is quite nice to resist Psychic for the Alakazam matchup. You're not too threatened by Alakazam. Getting paralyzed is not a big deal on Exeggutor. It can still function and blow up and put things to sleep and do its stuff when it's paralyzed. So it can be pretty nice to bring Exeggutor in on Alakazam. You're not worried about that Psychic damage because you resist. You're not as crippled by Thunder Wave as other things may be. So Psychic typing has offensive and defensive advantages in that regard. Exeggutor probably wishes it was just a mono Psychic type. The Grass typing makes you weak to Ice, which can suck. You do resist Ground though, which is useful against Rhydon and Snorlax, and Tauros sometimes. But being Ice weak is unfortunate in a world where Ice Beam and Blizzard are rather commonplace. Grass typing does have some downside in Gen 1, but Psychic doesn't. Interesting, isn't it? Starmie, another powerful Psychic type, a water Psychic typing on this one. Starmie actually managed to rise significantly in viability over time. Exeggutor was once considered the 4th best Pokemon behind the 3 normal type Titans, but Starmie is now considered number 4 in the metagame. It is an excellent Pokemon. It is very fast, has solid defenses, has a great move pool, has Thunder Wave, Blizzard and Ice Beam, which are incredibly good attacks in Gen 1, especially thanks to their freeze chance. Blizzard with its high power and impressive accuracy. This would later be nerfed in future games. And of course, Psychic.
an outstanding move with its breaking power and brute force potential. Water typing is also probably just as good as it is bad because you resist ice, which comes up a lot. You resist water, doesn't come up as much, but sometimes. However, you are weak to electric, which leaves you targetable by enemies such as Zapdos, Jolteon, and Chansey running Thunderbolt. But Water Psychic has its benefits over just Mono Psychic because of that crucial ice resistance, which is important. Jinx also exists. Many people forget this. Jinx is quite a forgettable Pokemon, isn't it? In terms of the Gen 1 Pokemon. Many don't remember that Jinx was a competitive mainstay back in Gen 1. I made a video about Jinx recently. An interesting Pokemon. Ice Psychic is horrendous by modern standards, perhaps one of the worst typings you can have. But in Gen 1, this was an excellent typing. Psychic, no downside. Ice, pretty much no downside. Ice is weak to Fighting, Rock, and Fire, which are very uncommon types. Rock you might see on Rhydon. Fire, the occasional Moltres does see use. Maybe Tauros runs Fire Blast. It would rather just Body Slam you though. But Fighting barely exists. And Jinx is neutral to Fighting anyway, thanks to its complementary Psychic typing, but even if that wasn't the case, Machamp is terrible in this generation. There's no good Fighting type attacks. However, Ice provides Ice resistance in a world where many non-Ice types are using Ice Beam or Blizzard, and Freeze immunity, which is fantastic. And Psychic provides Psychic resistance and Psychic Stab, obviously excellent. So Jinx is actually kind of good defensively, even though it's notoriously an offensive Pokemon. With Rest, it can be like a status soaker. It's not worried about freeze. It can come in and just sit there, taking hits from Chansey and be okay. It's got Lovely Kiss for a sleep move that is reasonably accurate. So similar to Exeggutor in its offensive pressure that it poses, doesn't have Explosion, but does have Stab Psychic and Stab Blizzard or Ice Beam. And it actually has a bit more longevity than Exeggutor does with Rest and its incredible Ice Psychic defensive typing, which things I never thought I'd say, but Gen 1 is a different world, truly. Slowbro also exists, a Water Psychic type just like Starmie, but Slowbro operates a bit differently. He takes a slower approach, low speed, but better defensive stats, a usable AD special, and crucially, access to Amnesia, a pretty scarce move in OU. Snorlax gets it, but Slowbro is much better on the special side, and it has Stab Psychic to take advantage of, Stab Surf, which are nice special attacks. Slowbro can be an Amnesia win condition, and a pretty solid one at that. It does have its limitations though, can be prone to getting crit, which will ignore your boosts, and you will perish. Requires a lot of turns to ramp up and start posing a threat, which can be taken advantage of. But it's a member of the metagame that you must be aware of and respect, for sure. And there is also Hypno in Gen 1, a UUBL ranked Pokemon. Wonderful sprite. A lot of personality in this one for Gen 1 standards. They're very cool sprite. Hypno is kind of like Alakazam Light. It's slower. It's not as good in many areas. A little bit better on the defense side and attack and HP side. And a solid 115 special. Hypno does not have Recover, which is a big shortcoming. I think it has Rest, but that's a lot of commitment for it. But it does have Hypnosis and Thunder Wave, which Alakazam does not. Having Hypnosis is nice. It's nice to compress both sleep and paralysis onto one Pokemon when you can, which Hypno is able to. Obviously going to be outclassed by Alakazam the majority of the time, who can heal and is faster and more threatening. But maybe Hypno can be like a second Alakazam with a slight difference in its options, and maybe a little bit physically bulkier. Does this get Reflect? That could be useful, yeah. Reflect on this is a bit more effective off a higher base defense stat, so that's something to consider perhaps. It's interesting, could be viable. I don't know if I've ever seen it, but could be an occasional fringe pick in Gen 1. In Generation 2, Ubers is looking a bit more crowded. Look at this. Not only do we have a couple more Psychic types showing their faces, but the whole format has a little bit more going on. It's still a pretty bare bones Ubers format compared to the rest of the franchise, but Gen 1 just had 2 Pokemon in there. Mewtwo is no longer the best Pokemon in the game. The best Pokemon in the game is Snorlax now, which is quite interesting, isn't it? Even in Ubers, Snorlax is number 1. But Mewtwo, I think, is just behind, remaining excellent with its incredible special attack stat. No longer having a special defense that mirrors this, a bit weaker defensively now. I think Mewtwo nerves were in order after Generation 1's dominance, but that doesn't bring Mewtwo down that much. Still obviously outstanding. Amnesia is no longer boosting both special attack and special defense. It only raises special defense by 2. So not a common choice. Psychic, also nerfed. Only has a 10% chance to lower special defense by 1. Overall, the Psychic type feels a lot more reasonable now. Has some actual counterplay, with Steel type existing, and more coverage options to hit you, like Ghost coverage and Dark types existing. But Mewtwo is of course so overtuned that it barely notices these changes, doesn't it? Celebi is an all-new Psychic type. introduced in Generation 2 with a wonderful work of pixel art. Gotta give respect to the Gen 2 pixel art. Always delights me when I see the Gen 2 sprites. Some of the best sprite work in the series, we have to admit it. Celebi definitely following in the footsteps of Mew in its design, with 100 stats across the board, giving it versatility in the way it can be built, and some unique moveset options to set it apart. Leech Seed being the most significant, probably. Mew doesn't have that. Heal Bell also existing. Grass is an additional type that Celebi has that Mew doesn't, which has its upsides and downsides. Ground resistance, water resistance, but ice weakness, flying weakness, etc. Fire weakness. But I really enjoy Celebi. I think it's a good Pokemon. It's well designed. It's similar to Mew, but different enough. Lugia is an iconic legendary in the series, introduced in Gen 2. He's on the cover of the game on Pokemon Silver, and he's got a wonderful sprite. Look at this. You don't see the Gen 2 Ubers sprites too often, at least I don't. But look at this. How wonderful. Interesting Pokemon, a psychic flying type combination, and a more defensively oriented stat spread. One of the first examples of a primarily defensive legendary, which is interesting, isn't it? Psychic flying, not the best type combination for such a thing. It was fine back in Gen 2, before there were too many Dark and Ghost types to worry about. This typing wouldn't age great defensively. Eventually Lugia would get a significant buff to make up for this, and we'll discuss that later, of course. But even that wouldn't help Lugia out too much. But back in Gen 2, this is a solid guy, with good neutral defensive typing for the time, and a curse set which can be quite threatening. Aeroblast is a great move with 100 power that's hard hitting, off a solid enough attack stat. And Mew is still using a Swords Dance set primarily, but it's using mixed options like Fire Blast too to hit Celebi and Steel types, which help. A bit more variety in how Mew can be used now. Gen 2 OU has 3 Psychic types to its name, which is solid, but Psychic typing definitely feels significantly worse than it did in Gen 1. It has downsides now. Tyranitar exists in this metagame, a really great Dark-type Pokemon who can trap and eliminate Psychic types. So Alakazam is significantly threatened, no longer the Titan it once was. Exeggutor is having some trouble. The Psychic types viable in Gen 2 are definitely doing some heavy lifting in other areas to make up for the new weaknesses that Psychic type has to its name. There aren't that many Dark types to worry about, they're pretty much just Tyranitar. Umbreon can sometimes run Pursuit, but that's a weaker one. Psychic is not that bad yet, but it feels average now. It feels significantly nerfed. Exeggutor still functions quite solidly in Gen 2 OU with all of its fantastic offensive tools, including Explosion, Sleep, and now Thief, which can steal an enemy's held item, great against Snorlax or Blissey or Skarmory, Zapdos. Leftovers is the big new mechanic in Gen 2, the held items finally existing, so deleting a held item from the game can potentially remove hundreds of % of healing from a Snorlax or something that gets long-term value out of a leftovers. Exeggutor is one of the best offense enablers in Gen 2 still. Jinx is also still functional in OU just because of how much sleep provides you in terms of momentum. Tyranitar does exist now, who is your worst nightmare, with Rock and Dark typing to threaten both of your primary types, which is a problem. But you can manage. Jinx is still an offensive powerhouse in this generation. Sleep and a hard-hitting Ice Beam and Psychic. You can run away with things using Substitute and really apply a lot of pressure. Even Fish for Ice Beam freezes with Jinx, which can be massively impactful. And Jinx also gets Thief, another fantastic offensive tool for the metagame. Gen 2 has a lot of defense you need to break through. The big Snorlax, who heals near infinitely with Rest and Leftovers, and defensive boosts from Curse. And Zapdos, with its Rest, Sleep, Talk stuff, Raikou, similar. So having something like Jinx that can take their leftovers, put them to sleep, and just do big damage with Stab is one of the offensive cornerstones of this format. Starmie aged quite well in Gen 2, still very good. One of the better Psychic types defensively because it has that Water secondary type, allowing it to threaten Tyranitar, the main Dark type, with super effective Water type damage. So Tyranitar not even that effective against Starmie, and it wasn't all bad for Psychic in Gen 2. Now the fighting resistance is an actual relevant thing, because Machamp exists, who is a pretty good Pokemon now. Fighting is a real type for the first time, so fighting resistance comes in handy, and super effective damage against fighting types does too. Starmie can operate pretty well into Machamp, has Recover for immediate healing. And Rapid Spin, of course, useful utility to get rid of hazards. So Starmie is doing fine in Gen 2. Alakazam is ranked in UUBL in Gen 2, obviously not nearly as powerful as it was in Gen 1. It's still okay though. I've actually seen it a couple of times in tournaments recently, in SPL, some Alakazam usage. It has Dynamic Punch for mixed coverage against Tyranitar and Snorlax, at least allowing it to do something against those formidable opponents. It also has access to Encore, which is pretty nice utility. This can punish rest users or curse Snorlax, allowing Dynamic Punch to be safer to click. Fire Punch is pretty nice coverage to hit Forretress. Steel types now exist, making fire moves better, so that's good coverage to have access to. Definitely not bad as far as UUBL Pokemon go in Gen 2. And then there's Espeon, a new evolution with a Psychic typing. A very cool Pokemon, a fan favorite, a lovely, elegant looking cat, with a great sprite, of course. This can sometimes be a growth sweeper. It also gets Baton Pass, if you're interested, to pass the growth to teammates. I'm not sure how good that is, but it is an option. And you get healing in the form of Morning Sun. I think Vaporeon is a bit better at this, despite being slower. It has a better typing for it. This can be vulnerable to Tyranitar. Jolteon can also do the growth sweeper thing. But I'm sure Espeon has its benefits. HP Water is obviously for the Tyranitar. But this is vulnerable to status. It has holes that can be poked through it. Growth Baton Pass could be a better concept, but I think Jolteon also does this better. You at least don't die to Earthquake though. Maybe that's a benefit of Espeon over Jolteon for this role. Gen 3 introduced a lot of new Psychic type faces in Ubers, but many of them are the same face here, with all of these different forms of Deoxys existing. One of the coolest legendaries of all time, I must say. I love all the different forms. It's also visually very cool and creative. Some sort of Lovecraftian entity beyond human comprehension. We love to see it. And the best form in Gen 3 Ubers is definitely Deoxys Attack, who has very skewed stats offensively. 180 attack and special attack, 150 speed, but very low defenses. So this will fall to like just about any priority option or weak pursuits from things that don't even have any special attack. So insanely frail, but also insanely threatening. And physical Deoxys attack variants are more popular in this format because Shadow Ball is able to threaten Latios, who is everywhere. Also Mewtwo. Extreme speed hits really hard and is very useful, of course, against not only enemy Deoxyses, but all the reversal Salakberry stuff that you see around in Ubers, and random other miscellaneous fast threats. Superpower hits Snorlax, who is very common in Ubers. Blissey too. A Rock Slide hits Ho-Oh Lugia. So this is a great set of coverage here. You can go special attack on this, and Sub Pitaya Berry is a common option, allowing you to bring Deoxys down until it eats the Pitaya Berry, gaining special attack, and then you got the Bolt Beam combo with Thunder Ice Beam. This is good on rain teams because Thunder is boosted in the rain, and Superpower is still good mixed coverage. You don't need any attack investment to hit hard with physical attacks, of course, so always useful to hit that Snorlax, who is the premier special wall in the format, and Blissey too, who comes up sometimes. The second best Deoxys in Gen 3 Ubers is actually Defense, interestingly. You can only use one Deoxys form per team, so most teams are going to choose attack because it's the most immediately threatening and useful to the majority of teams, but defense can be used because it's the best at setting spikes, and you actually use it in an interesting way. It's more of an aggressive spiker. Deoxys defense is quite fast with base 90 speed, so with speed investment, you can just get your layers out there quickly, and you have a natural bulk to live a lot of hits and just get them on the field as fast as possible, and then you usually run a Gengar to spin block and just go in with spikes. And Deoxys defense is the best of all the Deoxys forms at doing this. And Fire Punch is nice to hit Forretress, a common enemy spiker. Psycho Boost is good, or random other coverage like Ice Beam, whatever you really need. And Taunt to disrupt other spikers too, like Skarmory and Forretress. The third best Deoxys form, which might surprise you in Gen 3 Ubers, is regular old Deoxys, who seems like the worst one. It doesn't have any specialized stats. It has 50 in its defensive stats, and only 150 in its attack, special attack, and speed. Why wouldn't you just run Deoxys attack? It was 180 attack and special attack, and a negligible cut to the defensive stats, all things considered. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Base form Deoxys has just enough in the bulk to live certain pursuit users in Gen 3 Ubers. Most commonly, Metagross. Metagross uses Pursuit and doesn't even bother investing in special attack because Deoxys attack is so weak that it will just fall anyway. But Deoxys regular, with a certain amount of bulk, I forget how much exactly, but a tiny bit of bulk can live that pursuit. And that is a big deal because you avoid being trapped and you can bring Deoxys back in another time, which is very high value, a fast offensive threat. And Deoxys regular form still hits pretty hard with its stats. Much less than 180, but 150 is still massive, so certainly still a threat, and sometimes worth it for that particular bulk benchmark to live certain pursuit users. And Deoxys speed is not very good. It doesn't really fit very well. Sometimes in other generations it's used as an aggro hazard setter, but Stealth Rock doesn't exist yet, that's not as high value. Deoxys defense does that job better because it can live more hits, and it's fast enough for the metagame with base 90. The bulk is more valuable for setting spikes. And offensively, this can be okay because it has way more bulk than any of the other offensive forms with 90 in defense and special defense, but your offensive stats are just so much worse. And the additional speed doesn't come up too often. I mean, the guy has extreme speed anyway for priority. I guess this can outrun enemy Deoxys forms, and you don't really need much in the way of investment in speed because your base speed is so good, so you can actually invest in other EVs pretty efficiently, but it tends to not be a very good choice here. The best Pokemon in Gen 3 Ubers is actually Latios, believe it or not. You would think it was Groudon or Kyogre, and yes, his name is Groudon, but no, it's Latios. Latios with a Soul Dew is an absurdly powerful threat that is able to check both Groudon and Kyogre because it's immune to ground and resists water, and it has coverage to hit both of them. Ice Beam for Groudon, Thunder for Kyogre, which gets buffed by the Kyogre's Rain that they set themselves. So this set is very common. You can also run options like Solar Beam to punish Groudon further, or Hidden Power Fire if you're running a Sun team and you want to get boosted from the Sun that you've set yourself. Thunderbolt if you're not running Rain. Dragon Claw is good on Calm Mindsets for big stab. You don't actually use your Psychic typing much on Latios, I will say. Really, it's everything else besides the Psychic typing that are the true benefits of Latios. The Dragon typing comes up more often. Psychic typing is kind of the detriment of Latios. It's the reason you can counter it, because it's vulnerable to stuff like that Shadow Ball I mentioned earlier on Deoxys attack, Mega Horn from Heracross. Even Rayquaza runs Crunch sometimes to hit Latios, so being Psychic type is not very helpful defensively against pretty much anything. And you never use it offensively, it's just a waste. You'd rather use Thunder, which hits really hard anyway, or Dragon Claw, which is just a better stab option neutrally against stuff. There's not that many Dark types to worry about. There's the occasional Tyranitar, but it's all the Steel types that are the big issue for Psychic. And the Dragon is also resisted by Steel, but it also hits other dragons, which comes up all the time in Ubers, because there's so many dragons up here. Latias also exists, and it's pretty much the same Pokemon as Latios, but with more special defense instead of special attack, which can sometimes be more useful on like the Carmine sets that want more bulk to be able to sweep with a set like this. Sometimes Latias is superior. And there's also Wobbuffet, an interesting Pokemon that was banned to Ubers. It's a mono Psychic type with Shadow Tag, one of the most infamous abilities in all of Pokemon, preventing you from switching out no matter who you are, no matter what you are. Arena Trap from Dugtrio does something similar, but flying types and Pokemon with Levitate cannot be trapped, making it semi-balanced. But Wobbuffet traps everybody. And although Wobbuffet has the most limited move pool ever, with pretty much just these moves and also Destiny Bond, and I think Tickle it gets, Tickle, so it can tickle you. It has Counter and Mirror Coat to reflect damage back to whatever opponent is trying to hit it, and it has Encore to lock you into something that it knows it can counterattack. For example, you hit him with a big return, Encore, now you know they're clicking return, you just counter and you've eliminated them. Wobbuffet can guaranteed eliminate certain targets in Gen 3 Ubers, like Snorlax. It can just come in and eliminate Snorlax every time if it's using Destiny Bond. With Safeguard, if you Encore them into a status option, you can use Safeguard, which shields your party from status, allowing you to get a direct switch into whatever you want, which can come in handy. Yeah, this was too powerful for OU, of course. Because of its ability to guaranteed trap stuff. Could also, Encore can go for 3 to 6 turns, meaning you can really stall things out of PP sometimes, which is quite the thing. But yeah, it's a Psychic type. Being Psychic type doesn't really matter. If Wobbuffet was just about any type, it would operate the same way. It just happens to be Psychic type. And Psychic in Gen 3 OU is an interesting type, because it's kind of good and bad. Fighting resistance is more of a relevant thing now. There are many more fighting types to worry about, like Heracross, Breloom, and Medicham. Machamp also still exists, and there's also Hariyama. So fighting is a common offensive type you gotta watch out for. But at the same time, all of those fighting types carry coverage to hit Psychic. Heracross, of course, just has Stab Bug, which destroys Psychic types by themselves. And all the other ones usually carry Bug or Ghost coverage to complement their fighting type attacks. So Psychic on its own does not really function very well against fighting. However, you know what does? The Steel Psychic combination. Because Steel perfectly complements Psychic in that department by getting rid of its weaknesses to Bug and Ghost and Dark, turning them neutral. On the contrary, Steel benefits from having a secondary Psychic typing because it is now neutral to fighting. So Steel Psychic, very complementary, very good. And there are two extremely meta-defining Steel Psychic types in Generation 3, and that is Metagross and Jirachi. Metagross is a top-tier Pokemon in Gen 3. Some believe it is the best Pokemon in the metagame, and I can understand why. With its outstanding stat distribution, incredible defense and attack, and solid special defense, all things considered, even pretty good speed considering how bulky it is. The ability Clear Body is great, preventing your stat stages from getting lowered, which comes up all the time against Intimidate. And you have Meteor Mash, which is extremely hard-hitting. Stab, you have Explosion, which can destroy things. Metagross can be used in many different ways. Choice Band being the most aggressive, but you can also go with a bulky set using Protect and Leftovers, which is a very sturdy option against things like Aerodactyl and Tyranitar, while also applying some offense with your physical attacks. And Metagross also takes advantage of its Psychic typing with this set, Mixed Metagross, which uses Stab Psychic as an option, which is quite good. Hitting pretty hard on neutral targets like incoming Swampert, and threatening fighting types, threatening Gengar, who is a poison type. That's one of the main benefits of Psychic as an offensive type in Gen 3, is that it hits Gengar super effectively. So that's pretty damn nice. Gengar usually tries to Will-O-Wisp Metagross, but you can catch them off guard with a Psychic and really get them, usually KOing them. And Jirachi also benefits from this great Steel Psychic type combination. One of the best new Pokemon in this metagame is Jirachi. It has the ability Serene Grace, which is a bit infamous, doubling the chances of secondary effects occurring. So Fire Punch has a 20% chance to burn. Body Slam now paralyzes quite consistently with a 60% paralysis chance on it. This one's a rough one. Ice Punch, 20% freeze chance is really high for such a punishing effect like freeze. And, you know, even Thunderbolt has 20% paralyzed chance. Thunder is quite good on Jirachi because of its 60% paralyzed chance, which makes up for the lower accuracy. And Jirachi also has significant set variety, usually leaning towards special attacking sets though, taking advantage of its Psychic Stab, which hits hard on neutral targets. It hits Gengar very well. Hidden Power Grass is great to threaten Swampert. You've got Thunderbolt and Ice Punch for that Bolt Beam coverage, Fire Punch to hit things like Forretress and Skarmory and Celebi and what have you. You can also go a defensive direction with Jirachi with the Body Slam 60% paralysis coming into play. Fire Punch is used not only for fire coverage to hit Skarmory, but to spread burn with the 20% burn chance. And you have Wish and Protect. Wish can heal up your teammates. Jirachi, one of the best defensive Pokemon and offensive Pokemon in this format. You can even do a bit of both with Wish Calm Mind, providing your team with the utility of Wish and being a bit of an offensive win condition too, thanks to Calm Mind and its great special attack and special defense boost it provides. This is a good set because you can have not only electric coverage, but also paralysis spreading using Thunder. Accuracy be damned. Claydol is another new Psychic type in this generation, and this is a situation where Psychic type actually makes sense on the Pokemon, because this is a Rapid Spinner. Rapid Spin is very important in a metagame centered around spikes so much, and the number one spin blocker in the game is Gengar, but Psychic hits Gengar super effectively, so you have the perfect trick up your sleeve to get Gengar. You can catch it on the way in, as it tries to come in and spin block you, or you just sit there and 1v1. You got respectable special defense, solid bulk overall, the ability to chip heal in the sand, which they don't. So the Psychic typing is a crucial element of Claydol. It's also a weak point of Claydol though. Other bulky ground types are not vulnerable to Heracross Megahorn as much as Claydol is. They're not vulnerable to Tyranitar Crunch. Tyranitar can be surprisingly bulky and actually get you with Crunch, even though you can Earthquake it. So that is a potential issue that you face. Tyranitar commonly uses Bug coverage too, which is rough for Claydol. Swampert and Flygon are both extremely solid versus Tyranitar, Claydol not so much. So the Psychic typing is kind of a core part of Claydol's design. It allows it to operate better against Gengar, its number one foe, but it also means it can't completely replace the roles of other bulky ground types like Swampert and Flygon, who are more solid against the physical threats that run Bug coverage. So Claydol has pros and cons in that way, but it's a fantastic Pokemon. Many teams use Claydol alongside something like Dugtrio or a bulky water type like Suicune or Milotic to patch up the poorer matchup into Tyranitar that Claydol has compared to things like Swampert and Flygon, forming a core of multiple Pokemon to do the job of a single Swampert. And the other time where the Psychic typing comes up is against Hariyama. You tend to outrun them and threaten them with big super effective damage, and you also have an entry point against their fighting type attacks too. Claydol can also be quite nice into Breloom, while Swampert or Flygon, your other ground-type counterparts, get really threatened by a Focus Punch, dealing huge neutral damage. You resist Focus Punch. And not every Breloom can afford to run Ghost coverage. Some of them don't, because Breloom has big move slot syndrome. So there are some advantages to Claydol's Psychic typing as well. Celebi is OU now, demoted from its previous Uber's position, and Psychic typing is an interesting trait on Celebi. I mentioned in a previous video, Celebi almost wishes it wasn't a Psychic type. If it was just a monograss type, it would not be threatened by Dugtrio's Hidden Power Bug, which is ×4 super effective. It wouldn't be threatened by Tyranitar's Hidden Power Bug, which is ×4 super effective, or Aerodactyl's. Bug coverage is a disaster for Celebi, and stacking two weaknesses generally tends to be bad. But Psychic typing does have benefits on Celebi too. Celebi can EV to outrun Heracross, come in on a fighting type attack, and KO it with a fast Psychic. That's dangerous. They could click a bug move instead, but you do have that option to outrun them, at least. You outrun most fighting types and hit them with Psychic Stab, so that does come in handy against them. And most notably of all, you threaten Gengar with Psychic Stab, which is very important. It's one of the best things about Celebi over a special wall like Blissey. Blissey can kind of fold to Gengar sometimes, who can wear it down with Will-O-Wisp Taunt or threaten Explosion or even Focus Punch it on the switch. Celebi has that way to just directly threaten Gengar and force it out. So that can give Celebi a lot of value. It can sometimes even be useful to resist enemy Psychic. That comes up quite a bit on Celebi. You are pretty nice against enemy Celebi. You are pretty nice against enemy Jirachi and Starmie sometimes, as long as you come in on water or psychic moves and not ice type attacks. If your opponent is running a Celebi set like this with just stab options and Leech Seed, you can run an offensive Celebi with Hidden Power Fire, and suddenly you are defeating them with your Fire type super effective coverage, and them not being able to touch you at all with their stab attacks that you resist both of. The Psychic typing is mostly bad on Celebi, but kind of good in some areas. It keeps the guy balanced. It allows it to be targetable, which is good, otherwise it might be a little bit too broken, to be honest. If Celebi was not ×4 weak to bug, it would probably be pretty difficult to deal with. It's interesting how Psychic type feels so different. Back in Gen 1, having Psychic typing was a divine blessing from above. Now it's kind of like an active detriment to keep you balanced by giving you bug weakness, which can be targeted, and Ghost and Dark weakness. Without that much benefit, Starmie is still going strong. It is a fast offensive threat with some of the best coverage possible with Bolt Beam and Stab Hydro Pump. Although Tyranitar exists as a dark type to really get you with its bug coverage or its dark coverage if it's a special attacking set, Hydro Pump with Stab on it usually demolishes Tyranitar. If they have no bulk, they will fall in one hit, and if you got spikes up, they also can't really come in and survive this. Your Psychic typing can come in handy for the fighting resistance and with the speed, and Psychic Stab up your arsenal. You do have a way to threaten fighting types, which is nice. And Gengar. You outrun and KO Gengar with this if they don't have enough bulk, which they tend not to on a lot of sets. Some do EV to live this, but it is still very effective against Gengar. It is hard to fit though, because you kind of need all of these things. You need Hydro Pump, you need the Bolt Beam, and you need Rapid Spin. That's like your best thing, getting rid of the hazards. So Psychic is a bit hard to fit, but on more aggressive teams, maybe on teams where we have a spinner elsewhere and just want Starmie as a attacker, you can afford Psychic. Starmie can also run more defensive sets, and on these sets, the Psychic typing feels a bit more like a detriment. Can be good against Breloom, barring HP Ghost, but against Hariyama or Metacham or Heracross, the Psychic typing is a detriment, and this set is not going to hit Tyranitar as hard, so they can hit you with the big crunch or hidden power bug and actually cause you problems. But the Psychic typing is more of a issue on this defensive set. The offensive set can get away with it a bit more because the Psychic typing can be used for an offensive advantage, which is nice, and also it threatens Tyranitar more directly, and all the fighting types more directly. This set can be exploited thanks to its Psychic typing. Alakazam still exists in Gen 3. It's UUBL once again. It's an alright Pokemon. It's fast, notably outrunning Dragon Dance Tyranitar after a speed boost, which is a great benchmark to hit. Same speed as Dugtrio with base 120. Mono Psychic is just not the best though, because you really invite in Tyranitar, which is a problem. Outrunning them after a dance requires them to be pretty low to die to in-power grass. All of your coverage is pretty weak. And if you compare Alakazam to other fast threats like Starmie, who I just mentioned, who can more directly threaten Tyranitar and has Rapid Spin, which is good utility, or maybe Jolteon, who is even faster and has Volt Absorb, which is really great into like Zapdos and Gengar, and has a better and more spammable electric stab type, then Alakazam starts to feel like a bit of a deadweight slot. I think the best thing Alakazam has going for it is Encore, which is a really great utility move. This can actually lock Tyranitar into Dragon Dance, which can force them out and save your life, and also lock like a Snorlax into Curse, a Suicune into Calm Mind, and really punish them. So that's probably the best thing Alakazam has going for it. Does see occasional use for this reason, but a bit hard to justify over the other fast threats in the format. Metacham exists and is a Psychic type. Psychic typing is not really the premier trait of Metacham. It doesn't use its Psychic typing offensively because it's a special type in this generation, but it's kind of nice to resist fighting on this Pokemon, giving it some more entry points. It's also at least neutral to Dark, so the Psychic typing isn't a super active detriment in that sense. Fighting typing a little bit complementary in that way. Yeah, Metacham, one of the strongest wall breakers in this game. It has pure power, granting a doubled attack stat, allowing it to achieve truly absurd levels of attack. I like a set like this with just 4 attacks, and Jolly to just go for the throat. Maybe a Lumberry is a more useful item since the guy's frail anyway. And yeah, it gets Shadow Ball for coverage, which is really useful. Can hit Gengar coming in, trying to dodge a fighting type attack. Rock Slide is great for flying types trying to come in, like Moltres, Zapdos, or Salamence. This guy also gets Baton Pass, which sets it apart from other fighting types. With Baton Pass, you can pivot into Magneton and get guaranteed traps on Skarmory coming in. A very prediction-heavy Pokemon. Can get big reward out of a Focus Punch on a neutral incoming defensive wall like Skarmory or Swampert or Flygon. Can really chip them down and punish them. And generally, kind of a hard Pokemon to use, but can be great on certain aggressive teams. Gardevoir is a new Psychic type introduced in Gen 3. With some pretty solid looking stats, 125 special attack, a solid 115 special defense. Not a great Pokemon though on its fundamental merits. One of the best things about Gardevoir is its ability Trace, which is a great ability. Copying the enemy's ability, which has some useful applications. You can copy Levitate and be immune to an incoming Claydol Earthquake or Flygon Earthquake, which is useful. You can trace Volt Absorb and be immune to the Jolteon's Thunderbolt. You can also trace Magnet Pull, which will subsequently counter-trap a Magneton, which can lead to some funny interactions. And probably the most relevant use of Gardevoir has been on a team featuring Linoone. Linoone has Belly Drum and Extreme Speed combo, but pretty hard to set it up on such a frail Pokemon. But Gardevoir has Memento, Hypnosis, and Reflect, which are just a great set of utility to enable this Linoone. Memento will be a self-fainting move that lowers your target's attack and special attack by 2. And then with a Reflect on top of this to halve physical damage taken, maybe Safeguard to protect you from status, Hypnosis to put the enemy to sleep. You can come in on like a Magneton, counter-trap them, set up all this stuff, and then go to Linoone. And it's kind of this hypercharged Linoone who has a Reflect up, so it's taken nothing from physical. The enemy's mementoed, so they have no stats. And you're immune to status, so you can definitely just Belly Drum and sweep the game with Extreme Speed, and this coverage helps too. Vapakuno made a team featuring this combo that was quite interesting. I made a video about Linoone where you can learn more about that if you're interested. Psychic typing started to feel a lot worse in Generation 4 with the introduction of the physical special split, allowing more dark types to take advantage of their primary attacking stat. You now have physical Tyranitar Pursuit to worry about, which hits way harder than the previous special attacking Pursuit that existed. So Psychic types are really struggling to survive, and most Psychic types that rise to the top of this generation either have a Steel Psychic typing to make up for that dark weakness, or they're just fast enough that they can do stuff quickly, where their defensive typing isn't as important as just setting Stealth Rock on the field, like a Zelf right here. Or there's something like Latias, who is just so strong in its stats and its tools that it can overcome the psychic typing. But psychic typing is starting to feel kind of bad. Fighting resistance is more useful, but then U-turn exists now. A lot of the fighting types get U-turn, or they get more dark coverage options because there's more dark physical attacks to take advantage of. It's starting to become rough to be a psychic type with all these new things that threaten you now. Not to mention, ghost types exist again. Gengar uses Shadow Ball. Shadow Ball is special coverage, so heaps of things use it as coverage to hit psychic types and other types. But regardless, there are still a lot of psychic types ranked in OU that overcome the typing's new flaws. Azelf is chief among them as a new hazard setting lead Pokemon. A very speedy psychic type, 115 speed, great offenses, and takes advantage of the new item Focus Sash to live a hit on turn 1, guaranteed. If you would get one hit KO'd from full, you survive on a single point of HP once per battle, which is great on a lead aiming to set Stealth Rock on the field as quickly as possible. You can then explode and start the game off with a bang. Being a psychic type doesn't really matter, it's really everything else that makes Azelf good. Happens to be a psychic type. Does not really use psychic as an offensive type because it's kind of bad in a world dominated so heavily by Tyranitar. It's a bit hard to justify using a move slot on psychic on this Pokemon that would rather have more useful coverage like Fire Blast, a utility option like Taunt, maybe U-turn to pivot out, or something like this. I think it can use Zen Headbutt though, but in my experience when I use Choice Band Azelf, I'm usually clicking U-turn most of the time and only clicking Zen Headbutt when I know the Tyranitar is gone, because locking into Zen Headbutt is so dangerous when a Tyranitar could just come in and pursue you and you're gone. It's really risky to lock into a psychic type move. From Generation 3 to 4, Jirachi went from a really good Pokemon to a godlike Pokemon. It is one of the contenders for best Pokemon in Gen 4 OU, probably alongside Latias and Tyranitar as the three big ones. And the big thing Jirachi gained was not anything to do with being a psychic type, it was this here, Iron Head, which has a 30% flinch chance, a new physical steel type attack in Generation 4, and of course with Serene Grace, this has a 60% chance to flinch, which is absurdly high. You can sometimes just flinch through things and destroy everything with Jirachi. Because of this, it's imperative to have steel resistances on teams so you don't get eaten alive by the flinches. And this is one of the most infamous moves in Pokemon history, the 60% flinch Iron Head. But Jirachi is one of the better Pokemon at actually using its Psychic Stab type offensively because it has Grass Knot as complementary coverage to hit Tyranitar, which is really nice. This is one of my favorite sets. Psychic Grass Knot HP Fire feels pretty nice. Psychic hitting a lot of things for big neutral damage, and then Grass Knot complementing you, allowing you to hit Tyranitar, your greatest switch into Psychic, and then Fire, allowing you to hit Steel types that resist Psychic too. I really enjoy this coverage combination. This is probably my favorite Jirachi set in the metagame. Very versatile Pokemon. I mean, look at all these sample sets. Pretty ridiculous. You can go mixed Jirachi with Iron Head and Grass Knot and Ice Punch, Fire Punch. You can go Choice Scarf Jirachi with Trick, Wish Jirachi with Defensive, Wish Calm Mind Jirachi, a bit of a Gen 3 moment here with this set. Insanely versatile Pokemon. I even saw BKC run Draco Meteor on it to hit Latias, which was an interesting tech. Bronzong is probably my favorite new Psychic type in Generation 4. This is a great Pokemon. It is a Steel Psychic with Levitate. What a fantastic combination of traits. It is immune to ground, and Steel Psychic is still a great type combination. This has aged well so far, covering its bases quite solidly. And this is a great Stealth Rock setter. It can use Gyro Ball, which hits harder the slower you are. And this guy has very, very low speed. You can go even lower with negative IVs and negative nature to hit as hard as possible with Gyro Ball, Earthquake for coverage, and even Explosion. This feels like Metagross, but better in a lot of ways. Metagross is still, of course, used, but Bronzong is superior defensively. Sometimes it can even feel superior offensively because it just does so much with Explosion. It's more consistent at hitting the field to get the Explosion. It also has Heat Proof as an alternative ability, and often there's a bit of a mind game with Bronzong as to what ability it has. It's risky to click Earthquake into Bronzong because they could just have Levitate, so sometimes you can use that to your advantage and go Heat Proof, which reduces fire type damage taken, allowing you to survive against, I don't know, maybe an Infernape Flare Blitz and hit him with the Earthquake or something like that. But this Levitate set here just runs an Oka Berry to take an incoming fire type attack once, which makes a lot of sense too. Latias is OU ranked in Gen 4. It dropped down relatively recently, a couple years ago now, but in the grand scheme of things, it was pretty recent, and that was quite a metagame shakeup. A rare instance of a Pokemon falling from Ubers to OU many years later. Some disagree with the change, some like it. I think Latias is pretty fun to use, and it doesn't feel too broken because Tyranitar checks it and stuff like that, but definitely one of the best Pokemon in the format. Some believe it is the #1 Pokemon. Kind of similar to in Gen 3 Ubers, where the Psychic typing is not really the star of the show here. It's really everything else, like the great stats and the Stab Draco Meteor. It's more of the Dragon typing that is the big thing. I don't know if Latias even uses Psychic coverage that often, does it? It's not a great choice to use Psychic coverage in a world so dominated by Tyranitar, especially on this Pokemon that invites in Tyranitar more than anything else does. Latias, the #1 switch-in, is probably going to be a Tyranitar to try and pursuit you, so you want to proactively Surf or Grass Knot them to actually, threaten the thing that's trying to defeat you. Although I will say the Psychic typing does come up against Infernape and other fighting types like Lucario. Fighting resistance is a useful thing. But overall, Psychic is kind of bad for Latias. Making it vulnerable to Pursuit and U-turn from Scizor and stuff like this, and from Choice Scarf Flygon. Really, it's great in spite of Psychic typing. Metagross is still good. It has some stiff competition from both Jirachi and Bronzong, who do similar things. Both of them have Stealth Rock. Jirachi can now do physical attack, so it has Metagross beat in that department sometimes, but Metagross still has the best attack stat, the best defense stat of them, and is a little bit better as a lead, probably. Hits harder with Explosion, has Clear Body, which does have its useful application against Gyarados, who can intimidate you. And it can also run more aggressive sets like Agility, which the others can't, and it can actually act as a bit of a sweeper, a bit more proactive. Bronzong may not have as high of a defense stat, but it ends up being better defensively because of Levitate, so Bronzong can usually stick around longer than Metagross, but Metagross applies more short-term pressure with its higher attack and options like Agility. Starmie's complementary water typing continues to save its life, allowing it to threaten Tyranitar, but Tyranitar now has a tool up its sleeve to actually counteract this. Tyranitar can run Pasho Berry, a new item, to halve the damage from a super effective water type attack and counterattack with a Crunch. Starmie may be a bit less effective against Tyranitar, not only because of that, but the special defense buff that Rock type gets in the sand. Starmie is also under fire from more super effective moves now. U-turn, more things being able to abuse Pursuit, more things having access to Dark and Bug coverage, and Ghost coverage. Starmie struggles a bit to be defensive. Every time I have used this set, the defensive Starmie, I've just been eaten alive by all the U-turn and the sand and spikes and everything. It's hard to rapid spin when a Rotom can just come in and threaten you with electric. So I do not like defensive Starmie in this metagame. It feels way worse than it did last generation. I think the best way to go with Starmie is full on aggressive and just try to damage things. It is still very fast and threatening, has great coverage. That is the best way to overcome Psychic typing, is just to act quickly before the Psychic typing catches up to you and gets you in trouble. Cresselia is also a new Psychic type introduced in Gen 4. It is a primarily defensive Pokemon with impressive stats, but unfortunately Mono Psychic not the greatest defensive typing nowadays to solely rely on. What's even more unfortunate about Cresselia, it can't use its primary healing move Moonlight because the sand is up 90% of the time in Gen 4 OU, so this heals less in the sand. You're relegated to using Rest, which is rough. That being said, Cresselia is kind of okay. It sees occasional use in tournaments. It's one of the most solid things at coming in against powerful physical threats like Infernape. You can just come in and pretty much wall them completely unless they use U-turn, and then you're in some trouble, but if they use anything else, you're good. And think like Gyarados, they can't really touch you that much. Flygon, if they click anything other than U-turn, is boned against you. You got Ice Beam to hit, Flygon, Gliscor, various things. This can come in against pretty much any physical attacker and then get a Thunder Wave going, which is really nice. This could hit an incoming Tyranitar and give them problems, and you have enough defense to shrug off a Pursuit or a Crunch, probably. It's also got Luna Dance to feint and then fully heal an ally, which is a really good move. Allows Cresselia to keep up the pace a little bit and not be so passive. You can do this and just win off healing up something important, maybe. In Gen 5, they made another Psychic type with Shadow Tag on it, Gothitelle, who is banned due to having Shadow Tag. When this was allowed, this was crazy because you could just trap something really passive and then boost up completely to full and just rest against them, sometimes even stalling out all their PP. You could even use like Tickle to lower their attack and defense and just sit there tickling them over and over, resting. And then you also get Charm. Yeah, you get Charm to lower their attack by 2 if you're just a complete immoral, non-epic sort of guy. But that's an option if you're interested. And shout out to Lugia, who gained the new hidden ability Multiscale, which was a significant buff. If you're at full health, Multiscale will halve damage taken from an incoming attack. This is one of the best defensive abilities you can get, allowing you to live just about anything. Even if it's super effective, even if it's boosted, you're probably going to live it thanks to Multiscale, halving the incoming damage. Makes up for the Psychic Flying typing that's becoming increasingly bad every generation. Multiscale is a significant boon to counteract that. Lugia, I don't think is too commonly seen though in Ubers, despite this. It's still vulnerable to rocks, requires rapid spin support to function very well. It can roost to reach max health. It can even roost repeatedly to keep getting the multi-scale effect procced, but it will struggle. It's weak to a lot of stuff. It has to be specifically built around, usually some sort of stall strategy, and then it can be okay. In Gen 5, Psychic types actually feel quite good, and there are multiple meta-relevant Psychic types to speak of, which is interesting. Why is this? Well, by being weak to Dark types, specifically Tyranitar, Psychic types reliably invite in Tyranitar. Tyranitar is the #1 thing that comes in against Psychic types. And because of this, by forcing in Tyranitar, Psychic types can sort of be thrown at Tyranitar until they eventually fall. And once the Tyranitar falls, all of a sudden, the Psychic type can roam free. This is a concept called Psy Spam, where you basically just sack Psychic types, and the idea is that Tyranitar can't beat all of them. So Tyranitar will eventually be forced in by all these Psychic types, eventually faint, and then you just go to the moon with like your Alakazam, Reuniclus, Latios, and usually you create spikes on the field to punish the enemy for switching repeatedly and pressure certain key targets. The best Pokemon in the game is also a Psychic type in Gen 5 OU. It's Latios, who is now OU ranked for the first time. A ridiculous Pokemon that many people think should be banned. It is just great stats. Draco Meteor, so spammable, so good. And this is a Pokemon that can fit on any team in Gen 5 OU. You can chuck a Latios on any team whatsoever and it will function and provide you with value. Which feels a little bit silly, I think. It is so fast. It is so threatening, it is so solid. And it also kind of helps you out defensively against common things. Keldeo exists. Secret Sword is a extremely threatening move, but that's where Psychic typing actually has a benefit for the Secret Sword resistance. So Latios and all these other Psychic types can come in against Keldeo and threaten them, and Latios just outruns Keldeo too. Also come in handy versus Thunderous Therian, who you resist the electric damage of. Latios can switch it against Thunderous Therian and threaten it too. Gen 5 OU is in a bit of a predicament, where if they did ban Latios, suddenly Keldeo and Thunderous Therian would become serious problems with their most common check removed from existence. Much like in Ubers and other formats, Latias also exists as a counterpart to Latios, usually outclassed by its brother, but superior on more bulky calm mindsets like this. And Latios also gets Healing Wish, which Latios doesn't get, which is a great option. That is a self-feint, fully healing an ally. Can actually be a great option on very, very aggressive teams, because this will heal up a Volcarona or something, perhaps, which can let you sweep. Alakazam has returned to OU glory. Alakazam has received one of the most significant buffs of all time, gaining Magic Guard, which is one of the best abilities in the entire game, providing a complete immunity to all indirect damage, including Sandstorm chip damage, hazard damage, status damage, all of it. Only direct attacks can damage Alakazam. So with a Focus Sash equipped, you basically have a guaranteed way to live any hit once, and then get even more out of your Alakazam that way. It is extremely fast, it is extremely hard hitting, and it can dodge all of these residual effects that plague the tier. Alakazam also has Focus Blast, allowing it to threaten Tyranitar. They tend to run Chuppleberry, but you can Focus Blast on the switch in, and then land one again. You'll land, don't worry, it'll be fine. You will not miss. It has Encore, which is great utility. This was the best part about it in Gen 3, and it remains a good choice. Allows it to punish Reuniclus trying to Calm Mind up, or anything clicking Protect or a healing move. And that is huge momentum, completely disabling an enemy, giving you free turns, which is always good. And you have some moveset customization on this. You can run Grass Knot if you want to more reliably hit Tyranitar with something accurate, unlike Focus Blast. Some also run Signal Beam for a similar purpose. Doesn't hit as hard on Tyranitar, but it's still super effective. And it also covers enemy Reuniclus and enemy Alakazam and Latios too. So that's useful sometimes for the bug coverage. Yeah, one of the most frightening offensive threats in Gen 5, and a central Pokemon on the Psy-Spam strategy. Because if a Tyranitar gets lured in by Latios and faints, Alakazam is off to the races, spamming Psychic to its heart's content. Reuniclus, another controversial Pokemon in Gen 5, recently got suspect tested and was not banned. The community voted against banning it in a democratic vote. I suppose they thought it was manageable enough. Some disagree, some agree, as is the way of the world. But Reuniclus is a more defensively oriented Alakazam pretty much, with low speed but great HP and more impressive defenses too. This is a good set with Recover and a Life Orb. Life Orb is also ignored by Magic Guard, so that's a great way to take advantage of Magic Guard and pose a serious threat. More commonly, you will see seriously defensively invested sets like this with maximum defense EVs. Sometimes Tyranitar can even struggle to actually take this thing out. It's so bulky, and it's healing with leftovers in the sand and all that. It's great into Keldeo. Shuts down Keldeo pretty hard, and it can quickly snowball out of control with Calm Mind. Toxic is usually a way to take out bulky sweepers like this and prevent them from just running away with the game, but Reuniclus, of course, is immune to Toxic, so can be really tough to actually take this out if it gets a couple of turns to set up. Celebi feels a lot better in the Gen 5 metagame than it did in Gen 4 because of its positive matchup against Rain teams. Rain is a new central archetype in Gen 5, and Celebi's grass typing comes in handy against all of their water type damage and scald damage. Psychic typing also comes in handy against Keldeo. Keldeo kind of increasing the stock of psychic typing in this generation massively by making fighting resistance so valuable. So shout out to Keldeo for helping out good old-fashioned psychic types. Celebi is also able to escape Tyranitar's Pursuit Trap thanks to Baton Pass. U-turn won't escape it, which is something you should understand. If you U-turn, Pursuit will still get you, but if you Baton Pass out, you can escape Justice and not take damage from the Pursuit. So that is also helpful for Celebi. Great switch in against Tentacruel. Great switch in against Politoed, and you have Psychic, which actually threatens Tentacruel and Keldeo. So Psychic typing actually useful. Imagine that. You also get Stealth Rock, which is cool. It's good to be a Stealth Rocker that threatens Tentacruel, because they can't Rapid Spin you unless they want to take a big Psychic and be on death's door. So this is actually a great set. I really like this one. Natural Cure also helps you against Scald by curing Burn, and also Toxic from Politoed and stuff like that. Comes in handy all the time. Starmie still holding strong. OU how many years in a row now? What a champion. The water typing is still saving its life against Tyranitar. Tyranitar does not really run Pasho Berry anymore because of how much it needs Truffle Berry against all those focus blasting psychic types. So Hydro Pump can actually deal big damage to Tyranitar. You also got the new ability Analytic, allowing you to lean more into the offensive side of Starmie. This Pokemon's attacks have 1.3 times power if you are the last to move in a turn. This may seem bad because Starmie's fast, it's usually the first to move in a turn, but if the enemy switches, they are the first to move because the switch happens first, so Starmie can deal bonus damage to enemies that switch in, basically, which ends up being very useful because of how often you force switches out. This is one of the best rapid spinners, probably the best aggressive rapid spinner in the game because of how fast it is. Air Balloon is common to allow it more entry points. With a temporary ground immunity, you can come in against Excadrill or Garchomp or Lando and threaten damage with all of its coverage, or just spin once to enable Volcarona or Dragonite to set up or something like that. Espeon gained Magic Bounce in Gen 5, which is one of the best abilities in the game, bouncing back various advantageous effects to the enemy, like hazards, most notably, and status moves and things like Leech Seed. Not the best abuser of it though in this format or moving forward. Was once game-breaking because of Baton Pass, allowing it to be a pretty much infinite chain creator, because you could Baton Pass to this, give it boosts, and then it can't be wall-winded away. It can't be taunted either, because of Magic Bounce, which blocks all those effects and, in fact, bounces them back to the enemy. So this was a game-breaking combination once. And this is part of the reason that Baton Pass was banned in most generations, because of this mechanic. But that's ancient history. In the modern metagame, you don't really see Espeon too much. Even though it's officially OU ranked, because it had such high usage when Gen 5 was current, but not a common choice in the modern metagame, no. The more common magic bounce user seen is Xatu, who existed back in Gen 2, but wasn't very noteworthy, with very average stats, even by Gen 2 standards, and nothing much to show for it in terms of upside, but now they gave it one of the best abilities in the game, Magic Bounce, which actually was enough to give this guy a bit of usage in OU in Generation 5, which is quite cool. It actually has some longevity thanks to Roost. Flying typing is good with Magic Bounce because since you can thwart the enemy from making Stealth Rock more reliably, flying becomes a better defensive typing, and you can dodge spikes, and you can dodge various things like Earthquake and stuff like that. You have bug resistance and fighting resistance, which come in handy. You also got reliable healing, you got U-turn to pivot, and you got Nightshade for reliable damage, just dealing 100. You also have Heat Wave, which hits Ferrothorn, which is very nice. Rocky Helmet can also help you rack up chip damage on entry points. Xatu is commonly seen on Sun teams because they desperately need anti-rock technology. They're running multiple fire types usually, so they need this way to counteract Stealth Rock to enable their Ninetales and probably like Victini if you're running a Sun team or something like that, some Sun threat. Sun is not the best strategy in Gen 5. Rock weak and vulnerable to rain and sand, so pretty bad. But Xatu does make it work somewhat. I think it had some SPL usage. And Xatu also supports anything else that you want to shield from rocks desperately, like a Volcarona maybe, or Kyurem or something like that. So Xatu does have some genuine application in Gen 5 OU, which I think is epic. I really like this Pokemon. It's got a funny vibe. He's got a good facial expression going on, and I like Magic Bounce on a Pokemon with weak stats. I think that is balanced, because Magic Bounce is so broken, but the stats are bad, so it evens out. Not that it's very relevant in the metagame, but the fact that it sees use occasionally is a testament to how good Magic Bounce is on its own merits. And where else do you ever see Xatu in OU? It's a pretty rare thing. I like that. And Slowbro, back from Gen 1. Remember Slowbro? Well, he got a big buff this time around with Regenerate, another one of the best abilities in the game, healing you for 1/3 of your max HP every time you switch out, which is the safest way to heal ever, because you can heal without putting yourself in harm's way at all. Slowbro already had pretty nice defensive stats, but this pushed it to actual metagame relevance, and it is pretty commonly seen in Gen 5 OU. It might even deserve OU status, to be honest, more than some other OU ranked official Pokemon, because this is quite a good Pokemon. Gets Scald, gets Thunder Wave, Ice Beam allows it to check like Garchomp, Dragonite, Landorus Therian, a lot of stuff to be honest, and it even has healing. It even has a really good defense stat, and if anything can overcome Psychic typing, it's something with Regenerator to just heal off any shortcomings. Plus, this is good into Keldeo, right? Water Psychic. Good into the rain matchups. Kind of farms Tentacruel. You can come in and just Scald spam against them, giving them issues. Spreading status on with the Scald Burns and Thunder Wave. In Gen 6, they made 2 Mega forms for Mewtwo, which is fun. Mega Mewtwo Y and X. The Y form is looking a lot like Frieza from Dragon Ball Z, and the stats are absurd. I mean, 194 special attack is crazy. It also gains the ability Insomnia, which gives it sleep immunity because he will never sleep. He will never rest until his foes are vanquished. This is not a bad way to spend your 1 per team Megastone in Ubers. Some other things you might be competing with are Mega Gengar, who is really strong and can have trapping potential with Shadow Tag. Mega Salamence is really good, but Mega Mewtwo Y is insanely hard hitting and powerful. Can be a good win condition with Calm Mind. And same deal with Mega Mewtwo X, who is a more physical attacking variant, with an absurd 190 physical attack. And what does Steadfast do again? I forget. I just looked it up first. This is one of the most forgettable abilities of all time. If you land a flinch, you gain a speed boost. The heck is that? That's big nothing. So not getting much out of the ability. I mean, Mega Mewtwo Y gets Insomnia, which has some value. The ability, I guess, isn't the big part of this. It's really the stats that are the star of the show. You become Psychic Fighting, which is fun. And what do you got in the way of coverage options? I feel like these are kind of underwhelming. Like, this is the best you got. Low Kick actually is quite good in Ubers, though, because everything's so heavy. This hits pretty hard, I imagine. Because it close combat? It doesn't even get close combat. What the heck? What's going on with this? This does seem pretty good, though. It has good coverage for the metagame. And Taunt is disruptive. I think if I were to choose between them, I like Mega Y. It looks like Frieza. It's more fun. I like Psy Strike Stab, but Mega X can be built around too. And then you have Hooper Unbound, who I don't think is used in Uber, but was just too strong for OU. A very powerful breaker with great mixed attacking stats. I mean, great is an understatement, Jimothy. It's got 160 attack and 170 special attack. Psychic Dark is just a bad typing though. It's times 4 bug weak, which is a huge problem. I cannot imagine this being very good in Gen 6 Ubers, especially with 60 base defense being a targetable weak point and just being a bit too slow and probably not being that useful as a wall breaker when I think you'd rather just have something fast that's more immediately threatening. I don't know how this even hits the field either. This is ranked OU in future generations, and even there it has big shortcomings with its low physical defense and vulnerability to U-turn, but with pivoting support it can come in and be a wall breaker and do stuff. Gen 6 is where psychic typing would really start to feel like an active detriment though, more so than prior, because of the buffed knockoff in Generation 6 becoming the new best attack in the game, arguably, and being extremely common, extremely popular, not only on dark types, but just as coverage on any physical attacker that gets it. So psychic types are under fire from all directions. Mega Mewtwo Y up in Ubers at least can't get knocked off because of its Mega Stone, which prevents the knockoff from dealing its extra damage and removing the item. But any psychic type that is not a Mega Evolution is massively threatened by that ever-powerful knockoff. Mew is one of the few that actually can function relatively well defensively though. Mew had a pretty big fall last generation from Ubers all the way down to UU, not finding much of a home for itself in OU. Occasionally it has seen use in OU on like baton pass teams when that was allowed. Sometimes it can be used for its miscellaneous utility, but Gen 5 is a fast-paced metagame where a lot of stuff really struggles to find much of a place in the over-centralizing world of Latios, Keldeo, Tyranitar, Psy-Spam and all this. But in Gen 6, Mew has access to Defog, which is really useful utility. A new effect on Defog allows it to remove hazards from both sides of the field, which is a new form of hazard control that isn't rapid spin, so that's nice for Mew. Also has Will-O-Wisp, which allows it to thwart potential physical attackers. Will-O-Wisp is more accurate now, making it a bit better. And Mew also has Soft Boiled to be able to heal reliably, and 100 base stats across the board gives it effective bulk, so Mew is OU ranked and it's pretty good in Gen 6. The Laddie twins got 2 new Mega forms. I found an image on Google of Pokemon Go Mega Latios and Latias. What is the difference, folks? Is it just the eye color? One is red eyes, one is yellow eyes. Is this the reality? They have made the same Pokemon and called them different Pokemon. They can't do that. Mega Medicham is a psychic type that isn't worried whatsoever about the new knockoff because it's neutral to dark anyway, and also it's holding a Mega Stone, meaning it can't get knocked off and it won't deal the extra damage. So it's totally dodging that whole situation. And on top of that, it's one of the best breakers in the metagame with a 100 base attack that gets doubled thanks to pure power. It has way more coverage than Medicham did back in OU because of Elemental Punches now being physical. Fake Out allows it to safely Mega Evolve, granting it the free turn to do so. Mega Metagross, on the other hand, is suffering from its psychic typing now, because Steel type was nerfed in Gen 6 to no longer resist Dark and Ghost. So Steel Psychics are wide open to super effective Dark and Ghost type attacks, regrettably. Mega Metagross is good enough to overcome this though, with its outstanding stats and ability. Tough Claws grants 1.2 times damage on physical moves, and I mean its stats are through the roof, it's great defensively. And it at least can't get knocked off and lose its item and take the extra damage, so that's something to consider. It can actually shrug off knockoff pretty well, despite it being super effective, just off the back of its high defense and its immunity to the item removal effects. Mega Metagross is actually banned in Gen 7, but allowed in Gen 6. I think that's because of a mechanical quirk with Mega Evolution, where in Gen 6, when you Mega Evolve, you don't automatically gain the same speed as your Mega form. You still keep the speed stat of your base form until next turn. It's a weird mechanic. I think it might have been unintentional, but that's how it works in Gen 6 regardless. So when this Mega evolves, it starts out with the much lower speed stat of its base form, base Metagross speed, which is pretty damn low, so it can't immediately threaten things. It has to actually wait a turn before doing stuff. But once it gets going, it is an unstoppable force, of course. And probably the most popular Mega Evolution, I believe. Commonly uses Zen Headbutt too for stab psychic damage, which hits poison types who are now a real type because Fairy exists. Suppose that's a point in favor of psychic types, is that hitting poison is a bit more relevant now, because poison is better thanks to Fairy, which is an interesting development. So you can hit a Moongus and Mega Venusaur with that, which is useful. Alakazam got a new Mega form, and it always confused me why this was UUBL ranked in Gen 6. It may be an outdated ranking, but if I had to guess, Mega Alakazam is probably more under fire from its psychic typing than some of the other Mega Evolutions in the format, with stuff like Bisharp's Sucker Punch rising in popularity, and even miscellaneous priority moves like Scizor Bullet Punch threatening you. Choice Scarf Landorus Therian hitting you with Earthquake and U-turn, but despite that, I mean, Alakazam Mega has a lot going for it. In its base form, it's already very fast, and it has Magic Guard, which is useful to actually get you on the field safely against hazards and stuff. And then when you Mega Evolve, you get a new useful ability, Trace, which copies the enemy's ability, which can be great against something like a Swift Swim Pokemon, or a Sand Rush Pokemon, or Heatran. You take their Flash Fire, now you're immune to Fire-type attacks. And the guy's stats are just out of this world. There's 175 base special attack, 150 base speed. This is crazy Pokemon. I guess Psychic typing is just unfortunate as a mono-type, perhaps. And something like maybe Mega Lopunny would be a better choice for a fast threat that is a Mega slot on your team. Even though that is a physical attacker, not a special attacker, it doesn't have the same defensive shortcomings that Alakazam Mega may have. And this is still vulnerable to Tyranitar because Focus Blast is not the most reliable way to handle that, but that's something to consider too. But I imagine this still has enough advantages to be pretty relevant in the metagame and at least somewhat viable, or somewhat solid. Not too sure. Gen 6 experts can weigh in on that one if they're interested. Mega Gardevoir, on the other hand, is actually ranked in OU, and probably a better offensive Pokemon. Despite being slower, it has that good old Fairy secondary typing, which patches up a lot of defensive shortcomings. You become neutral to Dark, which is a big one, and neutral to Bug, another big one. And Psychic does help you out with the Stab Psyshock option, allowing you to actually threaten special walls like Chansey or Blissey, with damage dealt based on their defense rather than their special defense, allowing you to hit both sides of the defensive spectrum with this Pokemon. This can also actually hold its own against Tyranitar, not only because it has Dark neutrality, but it also hits with the Hyper Voice, which is Pixelate boosted. Pixelate will convert normal type attacks into Fairy type attacks and give them a damage boost, meaning Hyper Voice is a very hard hitting Fairy type attack, which hits Tyranitar's Dark typing super effectively. And Mega Gallade is kind of interesting, new Mega form for Gallade. I'm realizing I did not mention Gallade in Gen 4 when it was introduced. I don't think it's that good, is the problem. And I don't think this Mega form is that good either. It's UUBL ranked, and it's got some stuff. I mean, Psychic Fighting, similar to Mega Medicham, same typing, but this is faster, maybe has better coverage, has knockoff, which is good. Inner Focus, gotta say, a pretty unexciting ability for a Mega Evolution. Pretty lackluster, might come in handy against like a Jirachi Iron Head, but come on. Give it something with a bit more punch, I would say. That would be my opinion. And I mean, using this over not only Mega Medicham, but Mega Lopunny, who are both superior fighting type Mega Evolutions. One of them is also a psychic fighting type that is superior. Makes Mega Gallade a little bit unexciting, but it kind of looks cool, I guess. It's got a cape on. It's got interesting blade arm. Gen 7 introduced some new psychic type legendaries, and they even put them on the box of the game, which is fun. Lunala is the better of the two box legendaries. The Pokemon Moon legendary. It's a psychic ghost type, which seems horrendous, and it is pretty bad, with times 4 ghost and dark weaknesses. But it makes up for it, surprisingly, with the ability Shadow Shield, which is the exact same ability as Multiscale. I think it's funny when they do this. They just take an ability that exists, but rebrand it to be more appropriate for a ginormous moon fellow. If they gave it Multiscale, the fans would outrage at the fact that there is not multiple scales on this. No. But if it's exactly the same as Multiscale, but it's rebranded, I wonder if they gave Magic Bounce to some legendary Pokemon, would they rebrand that one too? Magic Bounce sounds too fun and whimsical for a serious legendary to have, so they would have to call it like Earth-Shattering Reflection or something like that. Anyway, back on topic. Lunala was pretty commonly seen in Gen 7 Ubers. I played a lot of that format myself, and Gen 7 Ubers is a world where you can actually remove hazards pretty reliably thanks to the defensive Arceus forms that can all learn Defog. So getting rid of hazards to preserve this Shadow Shield is quite reliable, and this would allow a backup check to just about anything because of the Shadow Shield that thwarts an incoming hit. Moongeist Beam is a great move. It has massive power, and it ignores abilities. So you can hit Necrozma Duskmane super effectively, ignoring Prism Armor. You can hit like anything with Unaware will not ignore your Carmine boosts if they happen to be using that. Psyshock is great to attack on the defensive side. You do see Chansey and Blissey up here. And Focus Blast is a good coverage. Solgaleo is the inferior of the two cover legendaries. It's unfortunate because Solgaleo is not bad. It's kind of nice until like Xerneas. Hits pretty hard, it's got good coverage. But it's completely outclassed by Necrozma Duskmane. It was pretty much the same exact Pokemon, but better, with better stats, better ability. And it can do Ultra Necrosium Z to become Ultra Necrosium Necrozma dipped in Mamaliz's chili oil. I mentioned in my dragon type video, but this is where Pokemon I think truly went a bit too crazy. This right here. Necrozma Duskmane, which is Solgaleo and Necrozma fused together with more hyphens than I've ever seen in a Pokemon name, transforming via a Ultra Necrosium Z Stone to use Ultra Necrosium Z Burst, my favorite move, transforming into the Necrozma Ultra form. Am I even speaking English? What am I saying right now? But yeah, this is unfortunately just Solgaleo, but power crap, then better. It is better in every way, because it also can bluff this Ultra Necrosium evolution, but it doesn't even have to run it. It can run many different things, like defensive sets with Protect and Leftovers, or Weakness Policy with, I believe, Rock Polish, or Rock Polish to boost your speed, and then you get hit by a Dark type attack from Yveltal and you go to the moon. You also have Prism Armor, so you can shrug off the Dark type damage a bit more and actually invite it to activate your trap card. It's got Stealth Rock on it. It's one of the better checks to Xerneas as well, because it's a Steel type resisting fairy and hitting them with the big Sunsteel Strike for super effective damage. When I was actively playing Gen 7 Ubers, I actually made the case that this Pokemon might be better than Groudon Primal. It's a crazy thing to say, but the sheer set variety on this thing and the difficulty of predicting what it's going to do, and the possibility that it can transform into Ultra Necrozma at any moment, makes it really hard to actually deal with and predict what it has up its sleeve, whereas Primal Groudon you can more reliably check with specific things, in my experience. Primal Groudon is definitely more meta-shaping, but this guy was much more difficult to actually play against in battle. Necrozma Dawnwings kind of stinks though. This is the other Necrozma fusion form. It also has Prism Armor, but it's a Psychic Ghost. Lunala really wants the Shadow Shield, the multi-scale effect, to overcome this horrendous typing, especially in a world where Yveltal exists. So Prism Armor is not even close to as good, and Necrozma Duskmane is also a far better and more useful Pokemon overall. This is a pretty bad legendary that I would very rarely see. And of course Necrozma Ultra is one of the most powerful Psychic types ever actually, which you have to transform into by using Ultra Necrosium Z on Necrozma Duskmane or Dawnwings, of course, as is understood by many. And this guy has crazy stats. It's got Swords Dance, it's got a big hard-hitting Z move that it uses as it's transforming, and then it's got the Quake Slide coverage, and the ability Neuroforce, dealing additional super effective damage to targets. What a Pokemon. What a guy. Quite a few OU ranked Psychic types in Gen 7 actually, largely because of Tapu Lele here, who really rose the stock of Psychic types overall by its sheer existence, because it creates Psychic terrain on the field, which buffs Psychic type damage. So Psychic types like to have Psychic typing to do more Psychic type damage. What a concept. This is one of the greatest breakers in the format. Achieving ridiculous damage output, Psychic Terrain boosts Psychic damage by 1.5 times. So Psychic and Psyshock hit absurdly hard. You can even destroy Blissey and Chansey with this. And Fairy is a fantastic secondary typing, cancelling out the Dark weakness just like Mega Gardevoir, allowing Tapu Lele to function defensively a little bit. And thanks to Tapu Lele's presence, Mega Alakazam is now an OU threat. Psychic Terrain also shields it from priority. That's another effect of Psychic Terrain. It makes everything grounded immune to priority moves. So Alakazam was previously threatened by Bullet Punch and Sucker Punch, even Extreme Speed, but no longer. Alakazam Mega can function much better now. Victini is also OU now, for a couple of reasons. Victini was introduced in Gen 5, where it wasn't the best. It suffered from its rock weak, and the fact that rain was everywhere, making its fire typing a bit of a detriment. But now, it has access to an interesting Z move. Z Celebrate. The Celebrate move has no competitive use, but with a Z Stone, Celebrate actually gives you an all-stat boost, allowing Victini to become a big-time threat with Stored Power. Stored Power would actually be one of the better Psychic-type attacks moving forward, and one of the reasons to use Psychic types. A really powerful boosting move that gains 20 power for each of your stat boosts. And since Z Celebrate increases all of your stats by 1, that comes to a total of 120 power, and when that is further boosted by Psychic Terrain from Tapu Lele, also shielding you from Sucker Punch and other priority moves, this can be a great win condition. Victini was also pretty good with the Choice Band. This was a pretty nice breaker in this metagame, allowing you to hit like Toxapex really hard with Bolt Strike. V-Create has enormous base power and can just absolutely annihilate almost anything. I used to run Torkoal and Victini for a Sun team, and V-Create in the Sun could even 2-hit Toxapex coming in. It was an absurd, powerful wall-breaking move. Many of the usual suspects here in Generation 8 in terms of OU-ranked Psychic types. But interestingly, Slowbro has really risen in the ranks. In Gen 8, Slowbro gains access to the move Teleport. It actually had this before, but now Teleport has a different effect, allowing you to switch out, and has negative priority on it, which is a big deal. You can slow pivot, guaranteed taking a hit and giving a safe entry point to anything you want. This turned Slowbro into one of the best defensive Pokemon in the game, and it's something you can even build teams around. With frail but offensively threatening wall breakers, you can use Teleport to get them on the field very safely and start KOing enemies with them. I recently spoke with Pinkacross on my podcast The Fridge, a fellow YouTuber and a great team builder who was very active during Gen 8. And he said Slowbro is one of the best Pokemon in this metagame, even better than Toxapex. He said Toxapex is overrated and Slowbro is superior as the bulky water type regenerator pivot. It was just because of Teleport. Teleport is very proactive, allowing you to pivot in whatever you want, and it can enable many different previously unviable Pokemon to actually hit the field safely. Future Sight also comes in handy. What do you know, folks? Psychic type damage being good. This hits 2 turns after being used, but it has a massive 120 power. Makes up for the lower special attack due to being more invested in defenses, but can actually rack up a lot of damage. And as for new Psychic types, we've got Galarian Slowking making an appearance in Generation 8 for the first time. One of the better Pokemon into Fairy types thanks to its Poison typing, and the Psychic typing allows it to actually pose quite a threat with options like Psyshock and of course Future Sights, which Slowbro uses too. This is another regenerator Pokemon, and this is one that surprised me back in the day. I kind of expected this to be outclassed by regular Slowking and Slowbro, especially because they have Teleport and this doesn't, but it turned out to in practice be very good. Poison Psychic has its applications, helps against Toxic, helps against Toxic Spikes, and Fairy types, and Fighting types. Even Stab Sludge Bomb can come in handy. And in Gen 9, Galarian Slowking would actually become even better with a new option called Chilly Reception, giving it that pivoting option that it lacked in the previous generation. This is a fantastic move that sets snow on the field, which is a new weather effect that has replaced hail. It sets snow and then switches you out, which is a lot to do in a single move slot. Slowbro also lost Teleport in this generation, which was its main pivoting tool. No longer has that. A lot of stuff lost Teleport that previously had it in Gen 8. So now Slowking Galar feels like the supreme pivoting regenerator Pokemon. Chilly Reception is such an outstanding move, also because it can reset enemy weather. If you're up against a sun team, it's really useful to overwrite their sun with snow, which is useless for them. Snow also has the benefit of supporting your ice types. You can pivot into something with Blizzard, and now that is perfectly accurate, or you can pivot into something that's an ice type, and a new Gen 9 mechanic is that ice types gain defense boost in the snow. So if you're running Kyurem, works very well with Slowking Galar already just from its ability to pivot in safely, but now there's an extra benefit of gaining defense in the snow. The Psychic typing is honestly kind of bad for this guy though. Iron Valiant was previously something that Galar Slowking could check pretty well, but then they started running knockoff on their sets to deal really big, super effective damage on the physical side and get rid of your boots, so having Psychic typing makes this Pokemon quite targetable. It's rough that it's weak to Dragapult Shadow Ball when this is mostly a special ball that wants to come in against special attackers, but unfortunately Goldengo and Dragapult are common special attackers that you can't really answer very well. Same with Darkrai, who is a Dark type who deals big damage to you. So Psychic is kind of a bad typing for this. The main benefit it's providing is, I suppose, Psychic neutrality. You're not weak to Psychic at least, which most poison types are. And Stab Future Sight is a good breaking tool. But other than that, it does leave you very vulnerable to a lot of stuff, in a world where Dark and Ghost is really common now. Iron Boulder is another Psychic type introduced in the later DLC, a future form for Terrakion, and his sprite is not loading in Pokemon Showdown, but that's okay, because we don't need to look at him anyway. There was a lot of hype surrounding Iron Boulder initially because of how speedy it could get with a booster energy and how threatening it was with its signature move Mighty Cleave, which deals big damage, is accurate, and bypasses protection. But funnily enough, one of the greatest downfalls of Iron Boulder is that dang Psychic typing, which really doesn't provide much and leaves it vulnerable to King Gambit Sucker Punch, which is a huge issue for it. You compare this to Iron Valiant, who has a Fairy Fighting type combination that times 4 resists Dark and has actual things it can switch in against. Iron Boulder struggles to switch in against much of anything. And it's also a bit more one-dimensional. There's a more limited move pool than other booster energy sweepers. Hatterene existed in Gen 8, but it wasn't quite at its peak yet. now it's OU viable. It's maintained OU relevance for quite a while. This is a Magic Bounce Pokemon, and it's kind of become the new premier Magic Bounce user. A rare ability. Xatu had it back in the day, but Psychic Fairy is such a good type combo for Magic Bounce. The Psychic typing is kind of a problem for Hatterene though. And the reason it's a lot better in Gen 9 is actually because it can ignore its own Psychic typing by terastallizing. By becoming Terra Water, you can not be weak to Ghost anymore and more reliably sweep with this Calm Mind Draining Kiss set, which is great because it has Magic Bounce, so it can't be toxic or stopped by Whirlwind or Taunt or anything. So that's good. This is a pretty nice Terra Sweeper and a good example of defensive terastallization. What's also good about Hatterene in this generation is that it supports Sun teams very well by shielding them from Stealth Rock because of its Magic Bounce effect, which bounces back Stealth Rock if they choose to use it. Deoxys Speed is ranked in OU now, a bit absurd to see. A previous legendary level threat now relegated to the same tier as the measly Iron Brian. But here we are. Deoxys Speed not even particularly top tier. It's a good Pokemon, but not metagame breaking or anything, which I suppose makes sense. Even though it's extremely fast, it has limited offensive stats. It's got a lot of good utility, but like King Gambit is the center of the metagame, so Psychic typing kind of stinks. This can be used for, Reflect and Light Screen, fast hazard setting. Can also be just used as a fast offensive threat with all of its coverage. It's got Psycho Boost, Superpower Knockoff. Psycho Boost, a pretty nice Psychic type attack, all things considered, with 140 power and a special attack lowering effect. It can also speed check a lot of things, outrunning even some Choice Scarf users, so that is useful, and like +1 Dragon Dance Pokemon. Also, Armor Rouge is a new Psychic type in Gen 9, an alright Pokemon early on, with a set like this, weak armor, allowing it to get a huge speed buff after taking a hit, and with a Focus Sash you could then start going in with like Calm Mind and usually Psychic Terrain and Expanding Force, so you're not vulnerable to priority, and you can also just defeat King Gambit with a big fire type attack. Wasn't a bad option, but I don't think those Psychic Terrain spam teams are particularly popular at the moment, and Armor Rouge was only really used on them, so a niche choice on an even more niche specific subset of Hyper Offense. Speaking of Psychic Terrain though, Indeedee is here. This guy existed in the past, but now it is sometimes used in OU because it's the only thing with Psychic Surge anymore. Tapu Lele, previously the premier Psychic Terrain setter, but now this is all we've got, and it's not very good. It's a very mediocre stats, but Psychic Terrain can be worth it on the right team. That Armor Rouge combo was quite good with Psychic Terrain. Expanding Force is something Armor Rouge gets to, a Psychic type attack that deals more damage in Psychic Terrain. So it's a very hard-hitting wall-breaking tool you can have access to. Poltegeist is sometimes seen on those teams. It can use Shell Smash and Stored Power. Also has weak armor to rack up a lot of boosts and then get as much out of Stored Power with Psychic Terrain to boost it. Ever since Gen 8, Psychic Terrain was nerfed though. It only deals 1.3 times extra damage on Psychic type attacks, not 1.5 like in Gen 7. So even in Gen 8, when Tapu Lele was around, it was no longer as ridiculous as it once was. It's interesting to see Indeedee here. I mean, that just speaks to the power of Psychic Terrain as a concept. Even though Indeedee is not great, of course, still desirable sometimes, purely for the Psychic Terrain. And finally, we have Iron Crown, also known as Iron Brian, who was a Pokemon I maligned at first, but I have come to respect. This is future Cobalion, and he's got a Steel Psychic typing, a classically good typing back in the day that has had some shortcomings ever since Gen 6. But here he is, a modern Steel Psychic type from the future. And he is proven to be a pretty good Pokemon for his ability to use this move right here, Tachyon Cutter, which can actually bypass Focus Sash and Sturdy leads quite well. Glimora being the particular target of choice. Glimora is a rock poison type that aims to set a bunch of hazards in the early game with its Focus Sash and its Toxic Debris ability, but Tachyon Cutter hits twice and will bypass the Focus Sash with its multi-hit effect, completely destroying a Glimora lead. On top of this, Iron Brian has pretty nice defensive value with an Assault Vest. It's got good attacking stats. This is a more aggressive pivot. It's got good enough switch-ins, but then it can actually pose a threat too with special attack investment. It's good into fairy types thanks to this Tachyon Cutter. Future Sight is good for wall breaking, and it can pivot with Volt Switch as well. I actually think Iron Crown is a pretty nice offense enabler at the moment, and it's a good Pokemon. It struggles with its Ghost and Dark weaknesses, but it can come in on enough and then pivot out and stuff like this Initially, I didn't think this Pokemon was much of anything, but as the meta has grown, it's proven to find a solid role for itself, with its anti-lead technology and its proactive nature on certain offensive teams. And there you go, folks, the Psychic type. It's gone on quite a journey, hasn't it? From the absolute peak of power to kind of becoming banned now. Being a Psychic type is a little bit of a problem in Gen 9. We've seen a few here that can overcome the Psychic type, but emphasis on the word overcome. Take a look at Slowking Galarian, who is an otherwise outstanding Pokemon, kind of held back by the Psychic typing. Latched onto it like a leech. But it remains a popular type. I feel like there's always a lot of Psychic types in OU, whether the type itself is inherently good or not. It's a popular type. They make a lot of them. There's many I didn't talk about, probably because they're not very relevant competitively. What do you think of the Psychic type? Do you think it's sort of lacking identity these days? And how do you think that Psychic types could evolve moving forward? And who is your favorite Psychic type in the series? I might have to go with Mew, for its versatility and its iconic design. Thank you for watching.